On a calm spring afternoon in Green Hill, Colorado, Oliver Grayson sat on the low stone wall outside his home, letting the breeze gently lift his long golden hair. Across the quiet cul-de-sac, the hum of distant lawnmowers mixed with the low chirp of robins nesting in the maple trees. The scent of blooming lilacs drifted from a nearby hedge, blending with the faint aroma of fresh coffee spilling from the Graysons' open kitchen window. Tom Grayson sat just inside, nursing his second cup of black roast, watching his son through the screen door with a thoughtful expression. Martha moved softly in the background, drying dishes, her eyes occasionally flicking toward the boy with that familiar mix of tenderness and concern. Oliver was 14, small for his age, but with a quiet presence that settled the room when he entered. He rarely made eye contact and often kept to himself, especially when the world felt too loud or unpredictable. But when he was outside, alone with the breeze in his thoughts, something softened. He sat cross-legged on the low wall, head bowed slightly, and ran his fingers through his long golden hair. Each pass was slow, deliberate, an anchor in a sea of sensations that often overwhelmed him. He wasn't just playing with it. He was centering himself, finding stillness. Inside the house, Tom leaned back in his chair, his voice low as he spoke to Martha. "You notice how he calms faster lately?" Martha nodded without looking up. "It's the hair. Ever since he started letting it grow out, he's more at ease. It's like muscle memory for his hands." Tom let the silence settle for a moment, watching Oliver's fingers move in rhythm. "I didn't think something so simple could matter that much." "Simple doesn't mean small," Martha said quietly. Out front, the gentle chime of a leash clasp echoed before a crisp voice broke the calm. "Well, don't you look like a little forest sprite today?" Karen Whitmore stood at the sidewalk edge, her lips pulled into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She wore pressed khaki slacks, a lemon-colored blouse, and a pearl necklace that gleamed in the sunlight. Her toy poodle, Apricot, pranced beside her, leash looped around a perfectly manicured hand. Oliver didn't respond. His fingers continued their path through his hair, unbothered. But Tom had shifted. He leaned forward slightly, alert. From the window he could see Karen pause, one hand on her hip as she surveyed the boy. "Oliver, sweetie," she chirped, "has your mother thought about a nice summer trim? It's going to get awfully warm soon." Still no response, just the quiet, soft repetition of touch and breath. Karen stood there a beat longer, her smile twitching before she turned and moved on, heels clicking sharply against the pavement. That evening, Tom met George Wilkins at the Green Hill Diner. The place smelled of bacon grease and cinnamon rolls. A laminated menu sat between them, but neither man touched it. "Was that her I saw on your street earlier?" George asked, flipping the local paper open and pretending to read. Tom gave a slow nod. "Walked by, said something about a haircut." George grunted. "That woman's got too much time and too many opinions. You know she tried to fine the Buchanans last year for planting daffodils that didn't match the seasonal color palette, whatever that means." Tom chuckled dryly. "She seems to think HOA means her opinion always." George leaned in slightly. "Just watch her. She doesn't just make suggestions, she makes lists." The next evening, under fluorescent lights and lemon bars gone stale, the HOA held its monthly meeting at the community clubhouse. Folding chairs lined the walls, and a pitcher of ice water sweated onto a plastic table. Karen stood at the front like a hostess preparing for a garden party, clipboard in hand, smile crisp. "As part of our ongoing efforts to maintain community standards," she announced, "I propose a revision to Section 3B, Appearance and Grooming Guidelines for Public-Facing Activities. That includes children. We want our community to be presentable, professional, a place where standards are upheld." Several heads turned toward Tom, who sat quietly in the back row. He didn't speak, just tapped his pen slowly against the notes on his lap. Karen didn't say Oliver's name. She didn't need to. 2 days later, the sun dipped low over Green Hill as Oliver sat once again on the stone wall. Apricot's yips echoed faintly from down the block. Karen approached from the opposite direction this time. She slowed near the driveway, sipping from a silver tumbler. Her gaze flicked down toward the boy. "Still holding on to all that hair, huh?" she said, her tone light, but with something sharp underneath. Oliver didn't move. He didn't speak. Karen stepped closer. Then, with practiced casualness, she reached forward, fingers brushing the top of his head. Before he could flinch away, she pinched a lock between her fingers and rolled it, like testing yarn. "You'll thank me someday," she whispered. Oliver froze. The rhythm stopped, his shoulders stiffened, and Karen walked on. That night, Tom sat on the edge of Oliver's bed, watching his son pick at the fringe of his quilt. "Dad?" Oliver asked, voice barely above a breath. Tom glanced down, heart already tightening. "Do you think she's going to do something?" In Willow Glen, everything looked perfect until someone started deciding who belonged. Saturday brought with it a gentle breeze and that particular kind of light that made every leaf shimmer. The street in front of the Graysons' home was alive with the echoes of bouncing rubber and boys' laughter. Oliver was in the thick of it, his bare feet pounding the pavement, long golden hair whipping behind him like a flag in the wind. Jake passed him the soccer ball with a low kick, and Oliver gave chase, his laughter clear and bright. For once he wasn't retreating. He wasn't watching from the porch or sitting silently on the stone wall. He was just a boy, playing. Tom stood at the edge of their front yard, pushing the old mower slowly along the grass line, one eye on the boys, the other watching for uneven patches near the walkway. Sweat clung to his brow, but he smiled as he watched Oliver dart between Liam and Ryan, his movements clumsy but determined. Martha had planted rosemary and basil in clay pots along the porch railing earlier that morning. Their scent mingled with the fresh-cut grass and a faint note of something crisp and clean in the air. It was a Saturday made for feeling safe. Karen Whitmore's voice cracked the moment like a dried twig. "Boys!" she called from the sidewalk, one hand shielding her eyes from the sun. "This isn't a playground." The laughter died down, not instantly, but in waves. The ball rolled to a stop beneath Jake's foot. Oliver, still catching his breath, turned toward her. Karen stood in a pastel cardigan over a cream blouse, her posture rigid. Her lips curled at the sight of Oliver's hair as it fell across his face. "This is a street," she added, eyes narrowing. "You could get hurt, or worse, scuff up the pavement, and you—" Her finger pointed straight at Oliver. "You still haven't cleaned up that mess on your head?" Tom straightened from the mower. He didn't move toward her, not yet. He just watched. Ryan muttered under his breath, "What's her problem?" Karen sniffed, clearly satisfied that she'd quieted them. Then, just as quickly as she had arrived, she turned and walked away, her sandals clicking as Apricot trotted dutifully beside her. The boys stood still for a moment, glancing at one another. Liam shrugged. Jake gave the ball a soft tap. Oliver smiled a little and jumped back into the game. Just like that, the moment passed, or so they thought. 3 minutes later, the boys heard the unmistakable sound of hard soles on concrete, fast and uneven. Karen reappeared, but this time she wasn't walking. She was storming. And in her right hand, gleaming in the sunlight, were scissors. Tom hadn't seen her return. He was near the side yard now, edging the lawn. The mower engine masked the sharpness in her breath, the clipped fury in her stride. Oliver turned just in time to see her coming, eyes wide, ball forgotten. Jake stepped in front of him instinctively. "Whoa, lady!" Karen pushed past him like he wasn't there. Her eyes locked on Oliver's hair, her mouth set in a hard line. "You kids don't listen," she snapped. "Nobody listens until something is done." Without a word of warning, she reached forward, grabbed a fistful of Oliver's hair, and yanked. Oliver let out a shocked yelp. His hands flew to his scalp, trying to pull away, but her grip was firm, fingers clenched tight, knuckles pale. "No! Stop!" he cried, his voice cracking. Karen's expression didn't change. With one motion, she lifted the scissors and began to cut. The metallic snip was louder than anything around them. A long strand of golden hair floated to the ground. Jake shouted, "Are you insane?" Karen didn't flinch. "He'll thank me later. This is for his own good." Ryan lunged, trying to pull her arm away. Liam stood frozen, mouth agape. More locks fell. Oliver sobbed now, his body curled, trying to shield himself. His knees buckled as Karen yanked his head back again. "I said stop!" Jake shoved her backward. Karen stumbled, the scissors dropping from her hand with a clatter. She caught herself against the curb, her cardigan slipping off one shoulder. Her hair had come loose, and for a moment she looked wild, unhinged. "He needed it," she hissed, glaring. "You're all too young to understand." Oliver crouched on the ground, cradling the strands sheared from his head. His shoulders shook with each breath, chest heaving. She cut my hair," he stammered. From across the street a curtain moved, then another. A door opened halfway, but didn't close. Faces peeked out, some frowning, some expressionless. No one spoke, no one stepped forward. Karen stood up slowly and brushed herself off. She stared down at the mess of hair and the boy crying beside it. "You're welcome," she muttered coldly. Oliver didn't wait. He clutched the hair, turned, and ran. His bare feet slapped the pavement, the sobs breaking in his throat. The boys didn't follow. They stood there, dumbfounded, watching his figure retreat up the driveway. Tom had heard the shouting, but by the time he reached the front yard, Oliver was already halfway home. Tom dropped the mower handle and ran up the porch steps. The screen door burst open. Oliver stood in the entryway, his face streaked with tears, his hands shaking. Tom reached out, breath caught in his chest. She cut it off," Oliver whispered. Tom Grayson had kept calm through hostage standoffs and federal raids, but nothing prepared him for the sound of his son crying like that. The sobs seemed to come from somewhere deeper than lungs, from a place inside Oliver that had cracked wide open. Tom had rushed to the door after hearing the screen slam. Now he knelt in the entryway, his arms wrapped around his son, feeling the boy's trembling hands clutch his shirt like a life raft. Martha stood frozen behind them, one hand over her mouth, the other pressed to her chest. Tom eased Oliver inside, gently closing the door behind them. The house, usually so still, now pulsed with an unfamiliar energy, anger, disbelief, grief, all of it tangled together like a storm gathering without thunder. The golden strands of Oliver's hair, once his shield, clung to his sleeves and collar, some still tangled in his fingers. "Sit down, sweetheart," Martha said softly, guiding him to the worn couch. She knelt beside him, brushing back the uneven fringe left behind. "You're safe now. She can't touch you here." Tom crouched in front of Oliver, examining the damage. The cut was erratic, hacked. Jagged clumps stuck out at odd angles, some so short the scalp peeked through. But it wasn't the hair that turned his stomach. It was the way Oliver's shoulders shook in silence, the way he refused to look up. "I'm calling Dr. Ames," Martha said, already moving toward the phone. "He's not hurt, but he's not okay either." Tom stood slowly, every muscle in his body tight with restraint. He didn't raise his voice, didn't curse. Instead, he walked into the small hallway off the kitchen, opened the drawer beneath the keys, and took out a black leather badge case. He hadn't touched it in over a year. It still held its shape, still held its weight. He turned it over in his palm once, then set it on the table beside the front door. The silence between him and Martha as she returned from the call said everything. "He's coming by in an hour," she said softly. Tom nodded. Then he clipped the badge to his belt, took a deep breath, and walked outside. The sun had started to dip below the treetops, casting a golden hue across the neighborhood. Porch lights flickered on, one by one. In front of Karen's house, everything looked immaculate. Fresh mulch, hanging flower baskets, a welcome mat that read, "Bless this home." The porch light glowed like a spotlight. Tom crossed the street with measured steps, not rushed, not slow, the kind of pace that made people pay attention. Behind drawn curtains, neighbors watched. He reached the porch and knocked. 3 firm raps. The door opened a few seconds later. Karen stood in the doorway, wine glass in hand, wearing a pale pink cardigan and an expression of amused detachment. Her eyes flicked over his badge, then back up to his face. "Oh," she said, feigning surprise. "It's you. Here to thank me?" Tom didn't speak. Karen leaned against the doorframe, sipping. "Honestly, Tom, it's just hair. It'll grow back." His jaw clenched, but his tone remained calm. "You assaulted my son?" She rolled her eyes. "Please, don't be dramatic. I was helping. That boy needs discipline, not coddling." "I'm going to need you to step outside." Karen blinked. "Excuse me?" Tom unlatched the handcuffs from his belt. "Karen Whitmore, you are under arrest for assaulting a minor." The wine glass tilted in her hand. "You can't be serious." "I'm very serious," Tom replied, voice low but firm. "Turn around." Neighbors began to step out now, drawn by the tension, by the sight of a man in uniform doing what no one else had dared. Phones were lifted. Cameras clicked. Karen's smirk faltered. "Wait, what are you doing? You can't do this. I'm the HOA president." Tom took one step closer. "And I'm a retired law enforcement officer sworn under the same county you live in. You assaulted a disabled child, in public, in front of witnesses." "You don't have authority." "Yes, I do, because unlike you, I know the law, and I know exactly how many federal statutes you broke." Karen stepped back, face flushing red. "This is harassment. This is discrimination." Tom stepped forward again, calm as ever. "This is accountability." He took her wrist gently but firmly, turning her around. The cuffs clicked into place with finality. Flashbulbs lit the porch as neighbors snapped photos and whispered to each other. Karen twisted in his grasp, trying to reclaim her smugness, but her voice cracked. "You don't understand what you're doing," she hissed. "Richard will bury you." Tom paused, meeting her gaze without flinching. Then he should have brought a shovel. Karen thought she controlled everything, but beneath Willow Glen's manicured lawns, rot had taken root. The first light of morning crept across the wooden floors of the Grayson home, washing over piles of paper that now blanketed Tom's study. The scent of fresh coffee lingered in the air, but the mug on his desk had gone cold. A ticking wall clock marked the slow passage of time as Tom sat hunched forward, sleeves rolled, badge off, eyes fixed on a series of scanned documents glowing faintly on his laptop screen. The night before had left him hollowed, but focused. He hadn't slept. There was no space in his mind for rest, not with Oliver's shattered expression still fresh behind his eyes, not with Karen's smug dismissal still ringing in his ears. Martha had checked in once, sometime after midnight, and left him a warm plate of toast and eggs that sat untouched beside the files. Now it was dawn. At 6:42 a.m., the bell over the Green Hill diner door gave its familiar chime. George Wilkins sat at a corner booth, his jacket draped neatly beside him, a newspaper folded to the crossword page, though no pen lay in sight. When Tom entered, George nodded once and slid a small manila envelope across the table without a word. "No names in there," George said, keeping his voice low. just copies. Originals are in a safety deposit box." Tom nodded slowly. "How far does it go?" "Far enough," George replied. "You follow the paper trail long enough, you'll find what people wanted, buried most." They didn't speak for another minute. The waitress brought coffee and left with a kind smile. Outside, the town was just beginning to stir. Back home, Tom closed his study door and opened the flash drive. It was worse than he expected. The files weren't just about Karen. They detailed years of complaints against the HOA as a whole. Handwritten letters from elderly residents claiming they'd been fined for flower beds that were too bright. Email threads where board members discussed how to pressure out homeowners who didn't fit the profile. Notices issued in error, then followed by silence when challenged. One spreadsheet contained a column labeled Target Priority. Tom felt his stomach twist. He clicked open another document, a scanned letter from a single mother who'd filed harassment claims after her biracial children were accused of loitering near their own front yard. Her emails went unanswered. Her final message had simply read, "We're leaving. I hope the next family doesn't have to go through this." Tom leaned back in his chair, letting out a long breath. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he landed on a number he hadn't used in months. "Phil," he said when the call connected, "you still have access to municipal archives?" The voice on the other end gave a tired chuckle. "You're not calling to talk football, are you?" By late morning, the HOA board had called a meeting at the clubhouse. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and unease. 4 board members sat behind a folding table, their expressions somewhere between alert and defensive. A modest crowd gathered in plastic chairs, mostly homeowners trying to make sense of the sudden shift in power. The chairperson, a man named Greg Holloway, adjusted his reading glasses and cleared his throat. "The recent arrest of our president, Mrs. Whitmore," he began, "was unfortunate and possibly an overreaction to a misunderstanding." There was a murmur, and not a friendly one. "We are reviewing the incident internally," Greg continued. "But let's not forget that Mrs. Whitmore has been a tireless advocate for standards in our community." From the back, someone muttered, "Yeah, standards for people like her." Tom wasn't in the room. He didn't need to be. The board would twist and spin, try to contain the damage. But the tide had already turned, and something much larger was in motion. That afternoon, inside the county holding center, Karen sat behind a glass wall. Her hair was pulled back, her makeup faded. The room smelled of antiseptic and institutional air. She had demanded to speak to Richard. Instead, a man in a pressed suit arrived, lean, polite, and detached. He opened his briefcase and placed a single envelope on the table. "What is this?" she asked, her voice sharp. "From Mr. Whitmore," the man replied calmly. "I'm here on his behalf." Karen opened the envelope and stared at the first page. Dissolution of marriage. Her hands trembled as she flipped to the second sheet, which detailed the separation of assets, the emergency motion for withdrawal of financial support, and a notice of her removal from the board of their shared charitable foundation. She looked up at the man, eyes wide. "Is this a joke?" "No," he said. "Mr. Whitmore wanted me to inform you that your name is already being disassociated from all joint holdings. He will not be posting bail." Karen stood up suddenly, knocking over her chair. Her voice cracked. "He can't do this." The man calmly gathered the documents and closed his briefcase. He just did. He left her standing there, alone. Back in Tom's study, the sound of a phone vibrating broke the silence. He picked it up, still hunched over the open laptop. "This is Grayson." A voice on the line spoke with careful weight. "We want everything you have. We're calling an emergency hearing." They called it a community meeting, but it felt more like a reckoning. The Willow Glen clubhouse looked different that day. Folding chairs stretched wall to wall, Everyone filled. Extra rows spilled into the back, where people stood shoulder to shoulder, whispering in low tones, clutching paper coffee cups, glancing at the door like something monumental was about to begin. Outside, news vans lined the curb, camera crews pacing, waiting. A banner that once read, Neighborhood Beautification Committee, had been hastily removed, the ghost of tape marks still visible against the beige drywall. Tom stood near the front, not in uniform, but composed. He wore a simple dark jacket, a folder under his arm, the worn leather of his badge case tucked into an inside pocket. On the table in front of him sat a laptop and a small speaker, quietly blinking. Beside him, Councilman Louis Brecker adjusted his reading glasses and leaned into the mic. We're here to address serious allegations concerning the Willow Glen Homeowners Association, including misconduct, harassment, and the possible violation of federal statutes. A murmur rippled through the room. Brecker glanced at Tom and gave a slight nod. Tom stepped forward. This flash drive, he began, holding it up for all to see, contains 8 years of records, some collected quietly, some buried. What it reveals is a pattern of targeted action against residents who were seen as inconvenient. Families pushed out, children isolated, people fined into leaving. He inserted the drive and clicked to play the first recording. The room fell silent. Karen's voice filled the space, arch, amused, unmistakable. At some point, she said in the clip, you have to decide whether a place is a neighborhood or a sanctuary. Some people just don't fit the picture. There were no gasps, no shouts, just a hard, heavy silence that spread like fog. Tom clicked again. A screenshot projected onto the wall, a spreadsheet labeled Compliance Watch List. Names, notes, photos, red flags for unapproved guests, messy landscaping, non-traditional families. He clicked again. An email exchange. Should we issue another violation? One board member had written. Karen had replied, 3 more should do it. People like them can't handle the pressure. In the audience, someone exhaled sharply. Another person whispered, that's what happened to us. Tom turned to the side of the room where the council had placed a small wooden podium. A woman stepped up, mid-40s, nervous. My name is Sophia Ruiz, she began. We moved here 9 years ago. My daughter, Samantha, was a straight-A student, but Karen accused her of vandalism because she helped paint a fence. We were investigated. We lost friends. We left. Another figure took the podium, an older man with sun-weathered skin. Name's Harvey Brooks. I used to foster kids, good kids. Karen called our house chaotic. HOA fined me for noise violations, but the noise was laughter. The testimonies kept coming. A couple who'd been fined for parking a visitor's truck in their driveway. An immigrant family who received letters asking whether they were legal homeowners. A single mother fined for having non-conforming decorations during Christmas. The room grew tight with breath, with fury, with something that had been buried too long. At the side of the room, a small TV screen flickered on, a live feed from the county holding center. Karen appeared in a pale jumpsuit. Her eyes were hollow, her face expressionless. She blinked slowly at the camera, then down at something on the desk in front of her. Behind her, a legal representative stood, arms crossed, impassive. Councilman Brecker turned to the board. We've heard from residents, we've reviewed the documentation, and we've seen a repeated abuse of authority designed not to protect, but to exclude. He lifted a single sheet of paper. We hereby move to formally dissolve the Willow Glen HOA, effective immediately. The room froze. Then someone clapped, soft at first, then louder. Then it spread, row by row. No cheering, no whooping, just the steady sound of palms striking palms. A release, a letting go. Councilman Brecker raised his hand for one final order. As for Mrs. Whitmore, he said, She will now face not only charges of assault, but federal investigation for violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Karen didn't react. She just stared at the feed, unmoving, as her world quietly collapsed. That evening, the clubhouse emptied. Neighbors who had only nodded at each other in passing lingered near their cars, talking for the first time in years. One man brought over pie. Someone mentioned starting a new council, one that actually listened. Porch lights flicked on up and down the street, not out of fear, but habit. At the Grayson home, Oliver sat on the edge of the couch, legs tucked beneath him, his eyes fixed on the replay of the hearing looping on the local station. He turned to Tom, his voice no louder than a whisper. "Can I go outside tomorrow?" Oliver didn't speak much, but when the barber asked what design he wanted, he didn't hesitate. A lightning bolt. The small bell above the door jingled as Tom and Oliver stepped into the barber shop on Main Street. It wasn't fancy, just a narrow space with a checkered tile floor, old black and white photos on the walls, and a slow jazz tune playing over the speakers. A barber chair sat centered under soft overhead lighting, its chrome polished and ready. The air smelled faintly of talcum powder and pine aftershave. It was Oliver's first time here, not because he hadn't needed a trim before, but because every haircut before this had either been postponed or quietly handled at home, on his terms. After what happened, Tom had asked if he wanted to wait longer. Oliver had only shaken his head and said, "No, but I want to choose." The barber, a kind-eyed man named Vince, crouched slightly to meet Oliver's gaze without forcing it. "You ever been here before, buddy?" Oliver nodded once. "Well," Vince smiled, gesturing to the big chair. "Today it's all about what you want." Oliver climbed into the seat with a quiet confidence that made Tom's throat tighten. Vince draped the cape gently around his shoulders. "Any idea what kind of cut we're going for?" Oliver looked straight ahead into the mirror, then turned slightly toward Vince. "A lightning bolt," he said clearly. "On the side." Vince raised his eyebrows with a grin. "Bold choice. I like it." Tom watched from the side, arms crossed, heart pounding for reasons he didn't quite understand. Martha stood near the door, holding Oliver's backpack, her eyes already misty. The clippers hummed to life, but Vince moved slowly, respectfully, making sure Oliver could see every motion. When it came time to shape the design, Oliver remained perfectly still, his eyes locked on the mirror. It wasn't about rebellion, it wasn't even about style. It was a mark, a symbol of what had happened and what wouldn't happen again. Later that evening, the Grayson backyard filled with soft chatter and the clink of glassware. Someone had brought sweet tea in mason jars. Someone else placed a warm dish of peach cobbler beside a slow-cooked brisket on the picnic table. Tom had set up the grill earlier, and now the coals glowed a low red as the sun dipped beyond the tree line. Neighbors filtered in, some with folding chairs, others with casseroles or lemon bars. Faces that had once avoided eye contact now smiled easily, some offering quiet nods, others pats on the back. Jake and the boys tossed a baseball in the open yard, taking turns diving for low throws, grass stains spreading across their jeans. Oliver stood among them, laughing when Ryan tripped and fell flat, pretending it had been intentional. He moved easier now, still quiet, but lighter somehow. He wore a plain blue shirt, the side of his head shaved just enough to reveal the sharp, clean bolt running above his ear. More than one person had told him it looked cool. He'd only smiled. Martha sat with Mrs. Wilkins and two other women from the neighborhood, sipping iced tea and swapping pie recipes. Tom stood at the edge of the patio, arms resting on the railing, watching it all unfold, the laughter, the noise, the life returning. George had brought an old guitar, and though he never played much anymore, he strummed a few lazy chords while perched on a bench. The sound drifted across the yard, mingling with the voices and distant hum of a lawnmower 2 streets over. As the sky turned lavender and the first fireflies flickered near the fence line, Tom looked over at his son. Oliver was standing near the tree swing, 1 foot perched on the wooden seat, hands in his pockets. He glanced up and met his father's eyes for a brief second, then gave a small nod. It wasn't a thank you. It didn't need to be. Later, as the evening wound down and chairs were folded, Tom and Martha stood side by side at the back door. The screen creaked slightly as it opened and then closed behind the last guest. The air was warm, still, humming with the soft pulse of summer night. For the first time in what felt like a long, long while, the house and the world outside felt quiet in the right way. Safe, whole, home. When a child finds the courage to choose for himself, it says something about the world he believes he lives in. In Willow Glen, it took 1 quiet boy, a patient family, and a community finally willing to listen to unravel years of silence and fear. Justice, when pursued with steady hands and clear eyes, has a way of restoring more than just order. It brings back dignity. And in the stillness of a summer evening, as fireflies flicker above freshly mowed grass, it's easy to remember, even the deepest roots grow stronger when they're no longer choked by weeds.